those are the things, those are the key ingredients that we need to experience the kind of crave-worthy, orgasmic, yummy sex that we're looking for. The excitement, the anticipation, the things that our libido wants to get out of bed for.
Welcome to the Sex After Kids podcast, a place for parents to come and learn together about the sometimes bumpy road back into the saddle of their sex life after adoption, childbirth, or joining a blended family. I am your host, Sophia Ashley, certified sex educator and sex coach, mother and stepmother, and your totally TMI guide to becoming BFFs with your body and initiating easy, connected, and confident, naked, sexy fun times. Here we are, one part science of sex, one part mindfulness magic, and one part straight up real talk to help you find the spark in your relationship and yourself after kids. I am so glad you are here.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Sex After Kids podcast. Today, we are talking about more alphabet soup. So last week we talked about the M word, and today we're going to talk about the P word and the V word, but not the P and the V that you are thinking about. So when I talk to couples, when we are working through challenges, particularly when we are kind of stuck in a rut, there's a lack of excitement, there's a lack of novelty, or sex in general is feeling lackluster. One of the biggest misconceptions that I see and hear that sort of emerges from people, and is quite subconscious in a lot of ways, is that sex equals penis in a vagina. Sex equals the P in the V, right? And the problem with this is that it's a very limiting view of what sexual pleasure is all about. And it leads to monotony. It leads to a lack of kind of discovery, and it leads to essentially the opposite of the real P and V that we want in our sexual relationship. The real P and V that we want are pleasure and vulnerability. So when we get focused on penis and vagina, we step away from pleasure and vulnerability. And those are the things, those are the key ingredients that we need to experience the kind of crave-worthy, orgasmic, yummy sex that we're looking for. The excitement, the anticipation, the things that our libido wants to get out of bed for. So let's talk about this, right? Don't get me wrong, little P and V action often feels great. And most of us are fixated on this either subconsciously or consciously because it's all we know. Sex ed is focused on the biology of reproduction. It's heavily focused on the penis and the vagina and how babies are made. And it's really not focused on pleasure and how our genitals are made to experience pleasure, all the beautiful nerve endings that are nerves that innervate that area of our body, and the rainbow of ways that we can experience pleasure and pleasurable touch in our downstairs mix-up, in our downstairs business, right? Also, most of what counts as sex in the movies would be intercourse as well. And we live in a very heterosexually focused world, a world where when I think of sex, when you think of sex, when most of the people listening to this podcast think of sex, we immediately default to two straight people, one with a penis, one with a vagina, having sex. So our sexual imagination can be quite limited. And that's kind of by design. It's by design in our culture and the way that we have been taught. And if you think back to our first couple of episodes where I talk about great sexpectations, this is one of them. This is a limiting belief that is holding you back essentially from the kind of pleasure, depth, connection, and yumminess that you are looking for in your sex life, especially in your sex life after kids. And we're going to talk about that, right? Because what I want you to consider is that if penis and vagina sex or intercourse was the only way to get our rocks off, then there would be whole sections of the population who don't identify as straight that either wouldn't be having sex or wouldn't be having sexual pleasure or pleasure from sex. But actually, the research shows that most gay and lesbian or 2 LGBTQ couples have more orgasm equality, which means that both partners are having the same or close to the same level of orgasmic satisfaction, and that women in same sex relationships are orgasming more often. So, if we go with our assumption that intercourse or P&V sex is the only kind of sex to be had, why is it that couples with two vaginas or two penises are having better sex, are having more satisfying sex, are orgasming more often, and are just reporting higher levels of sexual satisfaction? There is something in this equation that is not adding up. The other piece to consider here, the other little tidbit of data is that, and I'm sure you know this, but if you don't, like most people with vaginas, regardless of their sexual orientation, do not reach orgasm through intercourse alone, either all of the time or most of the time. I'm going to say that again. Most people with vaginas do not orgasm through intercourse alone. Okay. So when we think of that data, that piece of information, and then we think about how our gay and lesbian sisters might be engaging in sex as gay and lesbian sisters and brothers and folks, we can see why there might be more orgasmic satisfaction happening over there. Because if we have two vaginas that are engaging in sexual play, unless we've got dildos and other tools, intercourse is not happening. Other play is happening. And that other play has a word, and it's called outer course, which is just like everything that involves touching and playing with the genitals when intercourse is not at play. So, what's going on here, right? Like, essentially, when we insist on one version of sex, on intercourse being the only thing that counts as sex, we get trapped in a couple of ways. The first is that we get trapped in monotony. We are going to the buffet of pleasure night after night and eating the same 5 items out of 500 every single time. Yes, we are allowed our good old standbys and our comfort foods and to like what we like. And we can't keep eating the same items night after night and also experience the excitement, novelty, anticipation, and even a little bit of fear of trying something new. After we've had kids, we often fall into the second of the 5 stages of sexual relationship, which is maintenance sex, where we just do the routine. We do the thing that's always worked, often thoughtlessly and without intention. Sometimes this might work. And I've talked about this before, how after my first daughter, in the first, 2 years, maintenance sex was working for me. I didn't have much of a libido. I wasn't initiating very often, but I was okay with every 30 days, someone had to tap the other one on the shoulder and say, it's time. And we would bang it out, no frills, nothing fancy. And it would just bring us back into connection and work out some of those feels. And it worked for me. Now, 6 years later, with my second kiddo, with my libido in even more underground after my Hashimoto's diagnosis, maintenance sex was actually having the opposite effect for me. So it was putting me in a negative feedback loop where the lackluster, sort of like disappointing maintenance sex wasn't giving me enough. And therefore, I didn't want to have that kind of sex. I wasn't engaging in it, and I wasn't excited about having it next time. And it was basically backfiring and putting us in a situation where I wanted sex even less. I was really needing at that time and currently need novelty and interest. And I would way rather have sex once every 2 months, but have 2 hours set aside to really explore something new than to just whip out the good old standby on a Sunday night. So we're all going to be in different phases, but the risk of staying focused on intercourse being what counts as sex or penis and vagina sex is that we get into this monotony and we get into a place where our partner potentially is not there's not crave-worthy sex happening, and so their libido's not super fired up because we're in a negative feedback loop where our body goes, it was kind of shitty last time, so why should I bother opening up and getting excited for next time when I'm just going to be disappointed? We need to remember when things come to sex, like variety is the spice of life. And when we open ourselves to vulnerability and we are willing to try a few new things from the buffet, we can often be pleasantly surprised. So that's one piece here. Okay. Monotony is a big risk of staying focused on intercourse alone. The other risk around staying focused on intercourse alone is that it doesn't put us in discovery mode. And this is particularly important after children because after we've had kids, especially for women or the partner that's given birth, because of all the physical changes, because of all the hormonal changes, and because of all the identity changes, and if you haven't heard the Brick Wall series, I think it's like episodes 2 through 4, I dive deeper into those. But because of all those changes, we can end up in a situation where things that used to turn us on don't turn us on anymore. We can end up in a situation where certain moves or certain forms of touch like irritate instead of feel good, or the other way around, like maybe we're more sensitive to touch in good ways. But essentially, there can be all kinds of changes to what I call your pleasure map, your treasure map, right? So you used to have this map for like the certain moves that used to work, nipple play, stroking your partner in a certain way, thrusting at a certain speed, or like, you had your recipe for what worked. And often after we've had kids, many of those things are not working anymore. I like to think of this as like your partner's had a software upgrade and the keystroke like shortcuts that you used to use have all been updated, but no one's given you the manual on how to update them. And so you're here banging away trying to get Control Alt Delete to do the thing that you want it to do, and it's not working. And if we stay narrowly focused on penis and vagina or narrowly focused on the routine that we used to have, and we don't allow ourselves to go into discovery mode, we are never going to uncover what works now, what works today. And this is going to get us trapped, whether it's kids, that's the big change, whether it's perimenopause, menopause, a concussion, or like some kind of physical diagnosis like cancer. Essentially, anything that might physically change your partner's reaction to sexual stimuli is going to require you to be in discovery mode. You can keep hammering away, being like, this computer's broken, or you can look up the new cheat codes. So, this is where pleasure and vulnerability come into play, right? Those new ingredients that we're looking at. We need to get vulnerable and be learners again, be beginners again at this thing called sex. We have to allow ourselves the room for failure, for exploration, for making mistakes. I often liken this to cooking a new recipe. You are not going to master risotto the first time you cook it. You're going to do your best. You're going to read the instructions every 2 seconds. You're going to overcook it. You're not going to put in enough butter, whatever it is. You're going to eat your mediocre risotto, but you're going to observe what didn't work and then you're going to try again. And maybe by the third or fourth time, you are making chef's kiss risotto. If you don't allow yourself those first 4 failures, you're not going to get to the chef's kiss risotto. And this is the same thing when it comes to our sex life. We both have to say, okay, we're going to do some experimenting. There's going to be some failure. There's going to be some mistakes. There's going to be some things that don't pan out. We need to take this with a growth mindset perspective. We need to approach this as learning with the goal of getting to the place where we learn what those new things are for us today, right now. And we'll go through the process again and again and again. So embracing vulnerability and bringing in that like discovery mindset is huge for having the kind of sex life you want, especially after kids, when your body and your emotions and what turns you on and what turns you off have changed. We need to acknowledge that, get curious about it, and communicate and play, right? The last piece here is that, we end up with kind of this lack of risk taking, essentially, which just ends us up in a place where we're not trying new things, right? When we avoid vulnerability, we want to stay in our comfort zone. We want to stay with what works. And I want to acknowledge, like, a lot of you are in a place where vulnerability feels scary. If you're newly postpartum, then you're probably really focused on just getting back to what used to work. And this is the best opportunity that you have to just sort of reset and go, everything is new. And to learn from this podcast and from other resources that I have on how to embrace that and how to rediscover things. If you are, out of that newborn haze and it's been a couple years and you're more in the place where you're stuck in that I avoid asking because my partner turns me down all the time right now, you've been in a place of vulnerability for a while, right? And you have shut down a little bit because that vulnerability hasn't been greeted. And like even the other day, I asked my partner if he wanted to get naked and have fun, and he turned me down. And I admit that that did not feel good. And I spent the rest of the week not making overt bids, even though I was feeling in the mood. And then finally did at the end of the week, and he was like, "Oh, great." And I was like, "I've been trying to have sex with you all week." But he's like, "Well, have you? Because you haven't said anything or like even dropped subtle hints. You've just been thinking about it." So even the smallest little rejection, and it was very kind, he was just like, "I'm not in the mood tonight, like, can we try another time?" Can have that effect on us, right? And so if you've been more like pretty seriously rebuffed for a while now and are stuck in a cycle, then I can get that picking yourself up again and trying again feels really challenging. And this is where I just invite you to consider where you want to be stuck, right? Do you want to be stuck not trying, stuck in your own head, stuck not communicating about it, stuck feeling that loneliness, that distance, that's isolation from this person you really love and care about and from this person that you want to stay with? Or do you want to instead choose to be stuck in the vulnerability space where you are trying? Where you are trying new things, where you are taking risks, where you are making attempts. Because the thing we want to remember is whether it's getting over the vulnerability of like trying again after it's been a really long time, or whether it's getting through the vulnerability of expressing your deepest desires and fantasies and being terrified of how they're going to be judged or received, it's all the same. The connection that we are looking for, the variety, the excitement, the anticipation, all those things are on the other side of us getting vulnerable. And my biggest tip to you here is just to even say that out loud. It feels really scary for me to invite you to sex. I really want to engage with you in this way. How can we solve this? Or it feels really scary for me to say to you, I want you to do XYZ to my body. But it's something I've always been curious about, right? So let's recap. Lots of us are stuck on this notion that penis and vagina sex, intercourse, is the only way to have sex. However, a lot of the research shows us that outer course, especially focus on the clitoris for people with vaginas, is where the most satisfying sex is. When we got very focused on one way of thinking about sex, we get stuck in monotony, which means we engage the negative feedback loop because nobody's craving sex. We also get stuck in, I guess, like our comfort zone mode and not in discovery mode, where we aren't learning what has changed for our partner, or we aren't learning what has always worked for our partner that we just didn't even know, right? We are leaving a rainbow of pleasure and excitement and novelty off the table when we aren't willing to engage in thinking about new ways to play with each other. And we're avoiding two of the key things to the sex life that we want to have, which is a focus on pleasure, not necessarily orgasm, and a focus on vulnerability. When we master getting vulnerable together, we get the excitement, the novelty, the connection, the like deep soulful connection that we're looking for. And when we master exploring our pleasure and getting curious about it, then we go to new places together. I'll just sum up a little bit. I want to talk about pleasure just a little bit. Maybe we'll do a whole other podcast episode on it. Um, but pleasure is like such an interesting thing because we often have a discomfort with this word. And I want you to even register as you are listening. Are you like squicking a little bit? Are you like clamping up when I say the word pleasure? Pleasure is, an intellectual concept, but it's also something that's like felt in the body. And so, intellectually, when we have not learned to accept pleasure into our bodies or our body's ability to experience pleasure, when we don't think we deserve pleasure, when we think that the things that bring us pleasure are shameful or dirty or too much, when we have negative associations, when we think that we are not worthy of pleasure, or that we think that pleasure is indulgent, hedonistic, or demanding, then it's really hard to relax into pleasure of any kind in our entire life, and in particular, pleasure in the bedroom. So, our intellectual relationship to pleasure, the limiting beliefs, the brain gremlins that we have, the expectations that we have about pleasure, play a big role in our ability to embrace it. And on a physical level, your nervous system has like a tolerance for how much pleasure it can accept in any given moment. And many of us, especially during sex, we can be uncomfortable receiving pleasure. We can be uncomfortable being like the focus of attention. We need to sort of like direct it back to our partner. We're more comfortable being in the giving mode, or our bodies literally shut down when too much pleasure is being experienced. Like our nervous system goes into fight or flight because of those negative associations or because of traumas that we've experienced, and it dampens it down. And this was a huge part of my experience in my 20s. I often say that orgasm felt to me, I felt like Sisyphus. It's like pushing the rock up the hill, but I could never get it over the other side. And it was like my body would tap out. There was too much goodness. It was freaky and scary to experience this much sensation in my body. And so my body would go, let's shut this fucking party down. And then I was, not experiencing it was a frustrating experience to have sex, not a delicious, yummy, wonderful experience to have sex. So, our relationship to pleasure, both on a nervous system level, on an intellectual level, are huge in our ability to accept it. And there's a vulnerability, again, in surrendering to pleasure, in closing your eyes and fully focusing on what's happening to your body and letting go of your partner who's in this experience with you. Like that can feel scary, that can feel vulnerable, it can feel risky. And when we're not titrating our comfort level with that, we're not getting more comfortable with that, we're going to hit a ceiling on what we can experience in the bedroom. So, I hope that has opened some light bulbs for you today and potentially some paths forward. And like I say, if you're in a tough spot with your partner, one of the best things you can do is just invite them to listen to one of these episodes and talk about it with you. What is their experience with pleasure? What is their experience with outer course? What is their experience with what they think of as sex? Are there things they want to try that they're afraid of telling you? Are there things they're wanting to try that they're excited to tell you? Where are you both at on how vulnerable you're willing to get in this connection with each other? And where are you both at in terms of like your relationship with pleasure? Because at the end of the day, the question is, do you want to be that couple with a playful and vibrant sex life? Do you want to be that couple that's able to share what they desire, try new things, push their comfort zone within reason? There's always allowed to be things that you're not okay with or not willing to try right now or forever. And are you willing to be that couple that's finding the excitement and the anticipation that's on the other side of risking vulnerability in bed? Or do you want to keep eating the same 5 things at the buffet night after night and see what that does for your sex life in 20 years? I know which person or which couple I want to be, and I'm betting if you're here listening that you know which you'd like to be as well. If you have not hopped on a free reset roadmap call, this is your invitation. If you're feeling stuck, if you're not sure how to broach the conversation with your partner, if you're not sure how to get over that vulnerability hangover, this is a free 30-minute call where we will talk about where you're currently at in your sex life and map out the 4 steps to planning a sex date that doesn't suck, as well as some unique to you steps to bridging the gap in your sex life. Basically, what are your next steps in your sex life? Maybe that's a conversation, maybe that's a sex date, maybe that is something else. They're totally free. I will make sure that the link is in the show notes below. And I'll also add in the show notes that if you are having a pretty good sex practice right now, but you're willing to add some new things to the menu of your buffet, to the repertoire, then I highly encourage that you grab the Couple Goals VIP pass for the Sex After Kids Summit that I ran in November 2024. So this is a replay package of 20 plus presentations, and they are perfect for Naked Sexy Fun Times dates. They're all less than 20 minutes. My partner and I will regularly start a sex date by watching one of these videos. And some of them are actually guided sex dates. There's like a sensory play one. There's a couple on mapping your partner's erogenous zones and some fantastic genital touch play that you can experiment with. So if you're looking for something new and you need guidance, then it's $47 and you can access a year's worth of date nights essentially to help you expand your repertoire in a pretty safe way. Nothing in the summit is, wildly kinky. We've started pretty vanilla, but it's still going to expand your repertoire. So I will make sure that the link for that is in the show notes as well. Reminder, you can always DM me if you're not sure which way to proceed, if you want to work together. I am here. Let's chat about what's going on for you and how to get you back to fun, flirty, and sexy connection with your partner. We will catch you next time.
This is the part where we do the end bit, right? My friends, let's take a mindfulness minute here. Take a deep breath in. Open that mouth and let out a big, deep, full body sigh. Voila. Your nervous system thanks you. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that your head and your heart have something new to consider, something new to talk about, and something new to try. No husbands were harmed in the making of this podcast, and a big thank you to my husband for his help and original music composition. Love you, babe. This podcast was recorded on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and Tonquichan Council in Whitehorse, Yukon. We acknowledge and are grateful to the original stewards of this land where we get to play, live, and raise our children. You can catch me on the Instagram at the Happy V Project for tips, tools, and anecdotes. And you can also join the weekly-ish newsletter for dispatches from my bedroom and my brain. Also, head to thehappyvaginaproject.com to learn more about how you can work with me. Catch you next time.